Well, good morning. The election is over, and now we have to get on with the business of the province. So I'm here to release the first of a series of reports that have been waiting for a legislature to receive them. Today I'm releasing my 2010-2011 annual report entitled Engaging Solutions. The title arises from a disturbing but increasingly common trend that characterizes the government's response to various environmental problems Ontario is and has been facing. It seems the government is adept at defining environmental problems and even analyzing and proposing solutions, but too often they can't seem to get on with implementing those solutions. There are many examples of this in action emerging from the articles of this report, but a couple of significant examples make the point. Perhaps no topic has been more extensively analyzed, subjected to consultation, had proposals developed, and then reanalyzed than solid waste management in this province. The government set a goal of 50% reduction from landfill by the year 2000 and then fell short of the target. So the target was adjusted to 60% diversion by 2008, and we missed that one too. Presently our diversion rate limps along at about 23%, but it's not because we lack solutions to the problem. 4 times over the years, the Ministry of Environment has advanced proposals for a variety of measures through full public consultation. My report lists 19 policy initiatives that have been advanced and debated which would improve the situation. But despite the plethora of policy proposals, there's been no action from government. There is a stubborn refusal to engage solutions to the waste management problem. The behavior is also evident in the controversial world of the Endangered Species Act. Species at risk pose a difficult challenge to society. Ontarians share a widely held concern for species being extirpated from our province, or worse yet, being lost completely to extinction, and this is appropriate. But I think we all realize that in some situations, protecting species conflicts with important economic and social priorities, and compromises must be made. We passed a new Endangered Species Act in this province, which in a 3-step process, I believe has the necessary tools and flexibility. First, it allows for independent scientists to decide what species are in trouble, and then the Act calls for a team of experts to consider what options exist to help the species recover. At the final stage, the government considers the socio and economic challenges implied by the situation and issues a response document which is intended to lay out what the government will and will not do in response to the risk to a species. In this report, I have reviewed the first 13 of these government response statements, and instead of bold and insightful documents which gave clear direction, I found them to be vague and weak responses which made little commitment to government action and were of little use in resolving the conflicts that arise in the landscape when the habitat of endangered species is in play. When it comes to protecting endangered species, the government is refusing to engage solutions. But some of the government failure can be explained in the context of another matter raised in this annual report. You may recall that in 2007, I issued a special report entitled Doing Less with Less, where I looked at the funding of the Ministry of the Environment and the Ministry of Natural Resources over a number of years with respect to the increasing number of challenges facing those ministries. Those challenges in all areas of natural resources and the environment have increased yet again. So, with yet another round of budget cuts in the works, I thought it'd be useful to have another look at the budgets of those ministries. What I found was that in 2010-11, in constant 2009 dollars here, MOE is operating with 45% less money than it was in 92-93. Over the same period, M&R has lost 22% of its budget. A little better, but only because the increased fees for parks and hunting and fishing licenses go to a special purpose account where they must be spent on conservation purposes. The combined budgets of those ministries accounted for 2.15% of the operational costs of government in 92-93, and only 0.76% of the 2010-11 operational expenditures. We don't even pay 1 cent of our operational dollar to protect the natural environment. In my annual reports, I sometimes introduce what I call developing issues. These are matters of environmental concern or potential concern that have not yet captured much attention in the media policy, in the public policy agenda or the media. This year I have presented a background piece on the topic of hydraulic fracturing for natural gas extraction from shale or other tight geologic formations, commonly known as fracking. We have no commercially proven shale gas in Ontario, but given the geologic prospects and the recent controversy in Quebec where fracking commenced and then was frozen by a moratorium, I have recommended that the government review and report on the adequacy of the existing regulatory framework to protect the environment in advance of industrial development. I can take your questions.
On waste, couple things. Could you sort of explain diversion and what it is that we're doing and what we're failing to do in real terms that people understand without using?
Sure. The raw waste stream includes the green garbage bags at the curve. It also includes the commercial industrial waste from various sources, the mall waste, for instance. But the green garbage bag at the curve, we have a blue box, and we divert some of our waste into the blue box, and responsible citizens all. And that going fairly well. Sometimes we have green bins, and that diverts more. What we talk about is we're diverting waste from going to landfill or incineration in some cases. But we have to look at the full waste stream picture, because all that commercial industrial waste as well does not enjoy the same degree of separation and diversion. So overall, if you look at all the waste, about 1.1 tons per person in Ontario we produce, only about 23% of it actually gets diverted to recycling, recovery of other resources, and the rest of it goes to landfill or in some cases energy from waste.
Why is this a problem?
Well, a number of reasons. It's a tremendous waste of resources, and it puts a drain on the whole economy. If you recover things like aluminum from your stream, which has tremendous utility, then that's a tremendous loss to society, cost in energy and such. But as well, on a very practical level, we haven't approved a new landfill site in this province in quite a while, and our landfill sites are filling up. We're getting challenged for capacity. That's why we export so much waste to the United States. So we're in a precarious position here in terms of trying to find places to put our waste as well.
Can you explain why it's happening that we are still throwing so much of our garbage into landfills? Why is that happening?
Well, that's the point of this. When I started looking at this a year ago to write this report, we said, let's look at some of those specific questions like that. And we said, you know what? Staff came and we said, look, a whole bunch of answers are already on the table. There's a wide-ranging number of policy documents, all sorts of options that, like the Europeans, we could put a tax on landfill. That's what the Europeans did, and somehow the whole system changed, and there was a lot more recovery and recycling occurred because of that. There are lots of options, but we found that the options have all been put on the table by the ministry. It's just that every time they come out, 4 times they come out with a paper, said, here's some options, let's discuss them, and nothing happens. And again and again. So finally on this thing, we said, here's the story from our perspective. Lots of good options are on the table of ways of reducing this tremendous stream of material to landfill. We just got to do something. There's several possible combinations of policies that could be implemented.
Could you speak so specifically to what options you think would work?
Oh, well, my preference is the tax on landfill, and that one has changed, but that's just mine, and I'm not I don't make the rules. But if you put a cost on landfill like they did in Europe, you'll find all of a sudden all sorts of changes occur. In Britain, for instance, they put a cost on a charge on landfilling construction debris, and guess what? Up to 70% of construction materials on sites are now reused. The concrete is ground up and reused in other concrete or in aggregate under on foundations and such things. But there's amazing how much innovation and reuse, recycling, recovery occurs when there's an economic gradient in that favor. And here, landfill's just too cheap. We can dump our construction debris into Lake Ontario, off the Leslie Street Spit. That's a pretty cheap option. If we didn't have that cheap option, the resources, the innovation, the cleverness of our commercial economic system would come into play.
Can you tell us more about the Great Lakes and how come we're failing to clean them up when Obama seems to be able to find $2.2 billion over
Good
5
question.
years?
I mean, historically we've had this long-term relationship between the two countries and sort of a joint commitment to the Great Lakes, but somehow in recent years we've walked away, we've waned. Our commitment has been well short of their contribution. Right now, $2.2 billion of money on the American side. It's very embarrassing for us because we haven't not putting up anywhere near that kind of money. We haven't spent any significant money since the $30 million we committed to cleaning up the one site in Hamilton Harbor. So we really have to get onto it. It's not our historic tradition to back away from the Great Lakes. I don't know why it's stalled, but I do know the problems are serious in the Great Lakes, getting more serious, and we're not there. We're not there with the monitoring, the research, and we're not there with the cleanups.
What are the problems with the lakes? Can you give some examples?
Oh boy, there were many. In this report, I talk about the fact that in the lower lakes, primarily Lake Erie, we have a whole problem with the cladophora, that green filamentous algae that some of us remember from the 70s all over the shores. It's back. Now, it's back for different reasons, a complex ecological change that's occurred because we got zebra mussels and quagga mussels in the lakes, but nonetheless, phosphorus enrichment of the lakes is now reoccurring, and we're getting that green slime all over our near shores. We got major collapses in all the lower lakes of the base of the food chain. There's a little creature that, a little crustacean that used to live in vast numbers that was the basis of the food chain for the higher fish. They've just collapsed in numbers in recent years. We've got lots of challenges. We still got all the areas of concern, the areas we identified in the 70s as toxic cleanups that had to be addressed, and sometimes we've delisted 2 of our 16 or so in Ontario, so on the Ontario side. So the list goes on, and what you'll find is that there's an awful lot of things going on that we don't understand and we don't monitor for. In some cases we used to, and we've dropped it.
The Asian carp, what's your recommendation for me?
That's the one on the rise. There's a number of invasive species, scary ones. From the Great Lakes, the Asian carp is extremely, it's actually 5 species of Asian carp in play in the Mississippi River, and some are worse than others. But if they get in here, and we've got live transportation of them across the border, they've caught some at the border recently, that would be disastrous for certainly the lower lakes. We're not sure how well they do thrive up in Huron and Superior, but certainly the lower lakes looks like they could support these carp populations, and that would be disastrous ecologically. But let's not stop there. We've got, you recall, discussion about the Asian longhorn beetle, which is something that was introduced in Toronto, and we seem to have stomped out in Toronto. We jumped on pretty hard. But Asian longhorn beetle got away in New York State. It's in the maple trees and coming north. So there are invaders, and that one will potentially devastate the forest. And so there are lots of big issues out there in play right now. Not a good time to disarm your Ministry of Natural Resources and your Ministry of Environment.
About that, Commissioner, how do you see this prolonged period of austerity the government is preparing us for, and the actual effect it might have on the budget of MOE and MNR, and doing the things that need to be done?
Of course, I start these reviews a year ahead of time, so I didn't foresee entirely the circumstances that we're faced with now, but certainly it plays into those circumstances clearly. The Ministry of Environment, since 92-93, has kicked in 45% of its budget. That's a pretty good contribution to austerity. So I don't know what the government's going to do in terms of going forward, but know this, there is a tipping point beyond which bad things happen if we're not watching, we're not measuring, we're not inspecting, we're not on top of. I don't know where that tipping point is, but I have 35 years experience in environmental protection, and I'm nervous about our current situation.
Is the tipping point near us? Or?
I'm nervous. I say, and if we're going to cut back the Ministry of Environment cannot sustain any kind of significant cuts. There's no money there to save. We're talking $380 million in today's dollars. It's the 2010-11 budget for the Ministry of Environment, compared to the $47,000 million for the health. How much can you save of 380? I know the big numbers tend to be daunting, but the reality is the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Natural Resources provide important, essential protection for our natural environment and services to our society, and we have to be very, very careful if we're going to cut them back anymore.
Why are you concerned we're reaching the tipping point? Why are you concerned we are reaching the tipping
Simply
point?
because I've seen too many sectors, and you could go through not just this report, but previous year's reports, you'll see I constantly will come up with things that are not being done, things that are not being monitored, measured, reported on, inspected. The list goes on and on by those 2 ministries. And why? And I acknowledge that they don't have the people. They don't have the people who watch what's happening in the agri industry. They don't have the people who watch what's happening in the Great Lakes. They don't have the people that are watching with the flow of toxins and toxics. They don't have the people to watch what's happening with the invasive species. We're falling down on too many fronts, too vulnerable. So that's when I say, is there a tipping point? There is at some point. In one of those files, something's going to go wrong. Whether it's in biodiversity, or it's problems in waste management, or in the handling and movement of toxic substances in the natural environment, we're at risk, and we have to have people in position to protect us from those.
So as all ministries are preparing to be told to do some cuts in their budgets, what would be your recommendation for the MOE and MNR budget? Should they be cut? Should they be saved, like health and education?
Well, I'm not going to solve the finance minister's problem for him. I'm just my job is to report on matters environmental, and the advice I'm giving the government is that these 2 ministries are stressed almost to the limit, And so they have to be very, very careful about what further constraints. Am I going to suggest that there's no money to be saved in these ministers? I can't say that. I mean, there probably is money somewhere, but their overall budget and their failure to have the capacity to respond to things is occurring now. And so we're only going to make that worse.
So you're afraid they're going to get the short end?
We'll see.
You identify what you call a disturbing trend where you say the government analyzes things,
Yes.
they talk about issues, and then nothing ever comes of it. Could you elaborate a little bit more about what you're seeing as you call a trend?
Yeah, I actually have there's a little essay on the front of the report that goes into sort of that general concept of the lack of engagement solutions. But it's a broader trend in our time, in that if you can look at the policy, the advancement of government policy in a simple sense, there's, you got to define what the problem is. You've got to come up with, analyze the situation, what you may or may not be able to do, and then you've got to do something. And in the doing something is when you get, sometimes you try to do something and it doesn't work, but you learn. Or you try to do something and you see other opportunities to do things. That's the stage where all the things happen. What's happening now in the classic example, there are other examples, the classic example is climate change, where we have, if you look at the system being a three-step process, we've defined climate change as a problem decade after decade. We have a host of solutions proposed, but then people, sometimes people with vested interests cause their objections to be raised. Oh, no, we don't believe in climate change. So we go back and we define climate change, what it is, and then we can discuss what solutions are. And, well, wait a minute, we're not happy with those solutions. Oh, well, we better discuss those solutions some more. Always push it back in the cycle, never engage in solution. And that's exactly what we see in the climate change file. It was driven home, went to a university last year, and the university were so pleased. They said they'd had a 2-hour forum just to explain, to prove to these dissenters that climate change really exists. I said, what? You've just advanced the argument to about 1985, because that argument's over, and we now have to get on with doing something.
The other thing I wanted to mention, you mentioned the snapping turtle. In your
Yes.
report, you talk about how there's still a 2-turtle bag limit and that...
Per day.
Per day? Okay. And that you'd like to see a ban or hunt because for now, because you say the province doesn't know exactly how many
Yeah.
turtles are being taken. Can you talk a little bit about...
Sure,
because
Endangered
obviously-
Species Act. We set up CASERO, an independent scientific panel, to assess these species. And there's endangered, threatened, and species of special concern. Not really listed, they're not really, protected, but the scientists have said there's a concern about snapping turtles. They're slow breeders, there are a whole bunch of biological reasons. And we don't know much about them. We're not monitoring their populations. Yeah, so we've got a list of species that says it's a special concern. We have to watch it to make sure it doesn't become threatened. So what do we have? Well, we have a hunting season. They call it a fishing season because you have to have a fishing license to catch these things up to 2 a day, and with no monitoring, and people can go and get 2 a day, and these things don't reproduce until they're 20 years old. To me, that's just an unacceptable situation. If you're going to have a harvest limit that's recognized, you should have a pretty good handle on the state of the population. In the absence of that, precautionary principle says, let's just shut down the fishery.
If I could just come back to the waste thing again, everyone's okay with that. Are you blaming? Who are you blaming for the lack of diversion? Am I doing okay with putting out my recycling? Us Ontario households? Is it mostly about industrial?
We could do more in the blue box or the home diversion, and we could do more in those areas. But certainly, we get blue box is still a successful program. So you and your household, if you're doing the green bin, if you live where there is green bin service, then that's what we expect people to do. And the people in Ontario have embraced that program, and they're doing fairly well. There are other expansions, other stuff we could do to improve that. But primarily, you got to look at the whole waste stream. And when you go to the mall and you chuck your stuff out, or when you go to your school, your industrial complex or whatever, those waste streams are not getting the same degree of separation and recycling as the other ones from your home are. As well, there are other improvements in the way we do. For instance, one of the widely discussed things about Blue Box. Right now, Blue Box, the net cost of Blue Box is paid by half by your municipal taxes and half by the stewards, the people who produce the goods that generate those wastes. One of the proposals that's been discussed is a new way of doing it where the stewards would pay 100% of that cost, of the net cost of Blue Box, and the homeowners would be relieved of that expense. And that's from my perspective, a preferred way, because it puts the responsibility for the production of waste and the cost of that in the hands of the people who sell the products that generate the waste, which is better than putting it on your residential taxes.
Does that mean that you would, sorry, you would go back to Eco Fee program? Obviously very controversial when it was the second phase.
The Blue Box proposal, it's not, there's no Eco Fee or anything associated with it.
You're talking about more stewardship. Or would you, just sort of following along that, would you have the government go back and revisit the Eco Fee situation so that less ends up in waste?
On any waste that require special or hazardous or special handling, where the nature of the waste is such, I would like to see, and in fact, that's what the law says we should do in Ontario, the Waste Diversion Act, is the stream identified and diverted, and the costs of that handling that waste, whether it be to reuse it, recycle it, or just dispose of it because it's hazardous, should be borne as a hidden cost, as a cost of doing business for the companies that produce the goods. We put requirements for safety on goods all the time. You expect things that you buy for your children to meet rigorous standards of safety. That's just a cost of doing business on those toys. So why wouldn't we expect the goods that we buy to have a way to make sure that they're not causing hazardous risks to society or deleterious environmental impacts? Why wouldn't that be a cost that the companies should bear so that they become the ones that don't cause the problems, become more competitive and have an advantage? Let's let the market use it to improve the situation.
You want it, with, as you said, hidden within the cost of the
Cost of doing
product
business.
rather than slapped on the
Absolutely.
cash register?
Because actually, if you put it on top of the product, you're letting them off the hook. Because now, all of a sudden, the companies don't have to compete to make their product less hazardous. They can say, well, this consumer pays that, it's on top. We don't have to worry about it. You and I, we're both producers. Everything's good. But if all of a sudden it's my cost and your cost, I'm going to try to beat you.
Following that, where's the reluctance because of the government and some of the Canadian Ministry of Environment? They have a strategy out there to reduce, to include that pricing. Why is it not being implemented? Why are the strategies, where's the reluctance?
That's the point, isn't it? It's called engaging solutions. And why aren't they engaging solutions? And example after example we raise, we have lots of discussions of what solutions. 19 different policy proposals listed in here. I purposely didn't rule between them. I didn't say this is my favorite, this is my second. I said, here, 19 things that have been through consultation, all of which will improve the situation in waste management somehow. Why aren't we moving on any of them? That's the message. I don't know. I just think it's time we now step up to the bat and tackle these problems. Just ignoring them, they won't go away. They'll only get worse. Let's engage solutions.
Within the industry digging its heels in the sand, is it the government that being afraid of tackling them?
It might be a complex of things. I don't really know. All I know is that we've got to get on with business.
So sorry, I don't want to go and say that you are recommending that the government bring in this idea of a tax on landfills, although you did say that's one that you really like.
I said that's one I like. That's right. Yeah, I didn't recommend it.
Like it, but you're not recommending.
The question was, which ones do I like? There's one I like.
So do you not recommend stuff to the government? in
I
your
do,
position?
but as I just said, I deliberately didn't in the waste management. When we started the waste management piece, we decided, okay, let's look. Maybe we can come up with some good hard recommendations out of this. And we said, well, no. The problem is we've discussed, and we keep laying options on the table, or we, the Public of Ontario, are discussed and debate 19, at least, different policy changes that could be made that would improve the situation, and nothing happens. It's the nothing happens part that I'm emphasizing.
So aren't you letting the government off the hook by not saying it should do one of these things? Some of these things?
That's what I'm saying. Do some of these things. Do something. Address this problem.
Which ones?
Well, when they make that decision, then I will review their decision. That's the way the cycle works.
Can you just go with the timeline of
Sure,
the
this-
funding there? I'm not...
On this graph, you'll see these are the fiscal years from 92, 93 up to 2010, 11. And this is the total budget of the Ministry of Environment and M&R added together as a percent of government operational spending. And it starts up around over 2%, and over the years it's fallen off, and now it's below, it's down to about 3/4 cent. This is all normalized, adjusted for inflation in 2009 dollars.
So, can you just... So what you're saying is that in the last...
We don't spend a cent. We don't spend a cent of our operational dollar to protect the natural environment. Most people think we spend more than that.
And when did it really drop off?
Well, you can see the picture. It's been, we had a big hit in the early 90s, and then, it's gradually, except for one blip. Recall that I issued my special report in this year, and the next year it went up. We had a little, that's probably the Miller effect, that little slight increase. And then after that, when it died down, it fell off again, so.
Probably the pre-election effect.
Yeah, made preps.
So we're spending less dollars now than we did in the late 90s.
That's right. Ministry of Environment, for one example, is getting 45% less money than it did back in 92, 93.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, we're done? Thank you very much.